Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar with Rachael Cristine Woody. My name is Bradley, and I will be your moderator for this webinar titled How to Construct Attractive Museum CMS Projects for Funding. Before we start, I would like to provide some information about our company and introduce today's presenter. Lucidea is a software developing company specialized in museum and archival collections management solutions, as well as knowledge management and library automation systems. Our brands include Sydney, Presto, Argus, Archivera, Eloquent, and Quadrastar. Now, I'd like to take a moment to introduce today's presenter, Rachael Cristine Woody. Rachael is the owner of Relicura and provides services to museums, libraries, and archives. She specializes in museum collections management systems, digitization technology, digital project management, and digital usership. During the course of her career, she has successfully launched multiple digital projects that include advanced digitization technology, collaborative portals, and the migration of collection information into collections management systems. She is also a popular guest author for Lucidea's Think Clearly blog and has provided us with many great webinars that are listed on our website, so please feel free to check those out after today's session. Take it away, Rachael.
Great. Thank you so much, Bradley. Thank you, Lucidea, for hosting us, and thank you, audience members, for joining us. As Bradley described, we will be talking about grant funding, and we will be talking about it specifically through the lens of our collections management system and the work that we typically do to enhance our information, to enhance our collections, and the projects that tend to result from that. So bringing with us our CMS lenses to this particular topic. With that in mind, what we'll cover is how to identify projects for funding, knowing that we're going after a very specific area of our work and our collections. We'll review what funders are looking for, specifically the information to include, knowing that we're working on CMS projects, what is like the pertinent information that is need to know for the funders. And then how to determine the best funding match, knowing that not every grant agency out there or every foundation covers either digital projects or database work, that kind of thing. There are some very specific things to look for when we are grant shopping so that we make sure our efforts in the grant writing areas are best adjudicated to the matches that make the most sense for us and our projects. We then have tons of resources to share with you, including grant resources. There's a little bit of additional reading because, of course, if there's any more detail or additional examples you would like to read about, please go check out Lucidea's Think Clearly blog, as there will be some blog posts there that go into more detail and in more depth for some of these topics, and then we'll bring it home. All right, so how to identify projects for funding. This can be somewhat hard for us as collection stewards to conceptualize, especially if you're not used to thinking about your work in project mode, let alone in like this is a project that is ideal for grant funding. We as the collection workers and whether it's registrar, archivist, curator, or even museum director in a more smaller shop, when we think about our work with the collection, for us, it's an obvious, this is what we do, this is the job, it's an everyday thing. And so it's a bit of an exercise for our brain to say, okay, yes, it's an everyday to-do item for us, but there are ways that we can carve out certain areas of this work to identify as a standalone project, which is important if you're then going to go out to market, so to speak, whether that is with seeking donor funding or with seeking grant funding. So first step, conceptualizing within projects, and then second step, within the work and within those projects, what is attractive to funders and how can we best highlight that? So some additional prompts to sort of think through as you sort of train your brain to think about our work in this different way is first, give the people what they want. So we have information at our fingertips, essentially, that helps to inform what in the collection and therefore what type of projects or work that we do that has been of most use or has been accessed the most or has been involved in additional other projects like K through 12 curriculum, digital exhibition, to pair with a physical exhibition, for example. So we can look at statistics through our CMS dashboard to see which sorts of items are getting the most attention. If you have digital galleries deployed, which of those galleries seems to receive the most usage or perhaps the longest duration of visitorship. So there's a few different points of data that you can get just from the CMS in terms of what are people looking at, and then perhaps what would they want more of. So you can make some inference there in terms of this seems to be particularly popular with our community and audience. How can we deepen that? In addition to, of course, the quantitative data, the numbers, there is any sort of anecdotal or qualitative information that you can gather. For example, perhaps you know there's an exhibition coming up next year where there's a significant amount of the collection that has already been digitized, but maybe can't be incorporated due to size limitations in the physical exhibit. So perhaps knowing that that is going to be like the big blockbuster exhibit for next year, that it makes sense to have a specific project set aside to gather those digital items and create a digital gallery experience to pair with that blockbuster event. Another thing you can think about is like a wow factor. Of course, donors and granting agencies always want to fund things that are quick to get attention, that feels fun and feels or important for those funders to make sure that you get the grant award and that that project is worthy of being completed, worthy of being funded. So some sort of wow factor in terms of, while it may be very technical or data-driven work, the end product, the output of that work could be something like developing perhaps third grade curriculum, because third grade is the grade where local history is part of the core education that happens that year. Another wow factor could be presenting a digital storytelling exhibition for a part of your collections that had never previously been digitally exposed in that way before. So having not just, in quotes, the data and the digital assets out there, but going that extra few steps of creating some sort of product that would be exciting and that could deliver added value to one of your or many of your community members. The next one, the perpetual to-do list. This is another great prompt to think about our work in a bit of a different way. Many of us never have enough hours in the day to do our work. And so there are usually things that are like always on my to-do list, at least, that I just never seem to be able to have enough time to get to, or that I never seem to be able to prioritize. And sometimes those things are still worthy of being done, but they need like an extra effort or an extra carve out, or you need an extra set of hands to help get that done. So being able to package something like that in a way you can carve it out for a project, and then perhaps you seek funding to get an extra set of hands. Maybe you're able to get a grant to bring on 2 paid interns for the summer to help do some of that initial research and basic cataloging. So thinking about some of those things that would help to alleviate your workload, which we could always use, but also be able to have it be distinct and to be of service to other members, including the interns, in getting work on that collection done and funded through a grant. And then the fourth prompt to sort of think through our work or what needs to be done is thinking about projects that would require tremendous resources. So perhaps there's an area of the collection that requires some intensive conservation work before it can be digitized or imaged. Or perhaps the items themselves need some significant provenance research before we go out and want to put data out there, because we want to make sure what we have is accurate. Things like that, where it's going to take more than just like some free time and perhaps more than just a paid internship for the summer, and needing to have perhaps expertise, conservator or research brought on board, even in the like perhaps extra data creation, or perhaps we need to send out these items to be imaged because of not having either enough skill or equipment on site, and then needing to send it off to a place where there is either bigger area to stage, better equipment, things like that. So things that you would otherwise not be able to do, or would be very difficult to do unless you had grant funding. So these four collectively, it's helpful, I think, to think through each and all four of them at the same time, because even though we would identify projects for each of these prompts, some may make more sense than others in terms of other factors of like what's coming up next year, what's been pressing, perhaps what is critical that needs to get done, things like that that will help to inform which of these prompts and which of these projects may make the most sense for you for some strategic grant application. All right, what funders look for. So when we're thinking about our collections management system and the work that we do with our collections in it and with it, when we speak to funders, another thing for our brains to grapple with and learn is to translate for us what is perhaps normal language and a normal way to conceptualize things, but needing to translate it into a way where we may be speaking with fellow museum experts who happen to be grant reviewers, but that does not mean that they are going to understand necessarily all of the technicalities and even best practices and requirements that we live and know every day. And even if they are familiar with some of those things, another important factor to keep in mind is that every collections management system operates a bit differently, doing similar jobs, but doing it in different ways. And also, every museum, archives, historical society, each of you are different in your setup, in how jobs are done to some extent, and even what resources you have, and then what resource deficit you have, and that's why you're seeking funding. So things that we think are general everyday and it's fairly ubiquitous, we need to make sure that we're using common language to explain those things and that we're clear and concise, especially when we are talking about some of the more technical aspects of our collection work and within that collections management system. So with that in mind, when we look through these prompts, the first bullet point being a compelling story. For us, working in the collections management system, working in data creation and enhancement, digital storytelling, like for us, it's obvious the value of that work. We know what the output is. We know the potential for use once it is available and online. So we know all of these things, and the value of it is immediate and obvious to us. That is not the case, or is typically not the case with grant funding, especially if you're seeking grant funding not in like the museum realm. So keeping that in mind, we still need to be able to tell that compelling story. So giving, like, yes, this is a technical project, but like, what is some of the emotion behind it? What is the excitement, the aha possibilities of doing that technical work? That part needs to be upfront and center to capture the attention and the understanding of the grant reviewers right off the bat. And then, yes, technical is important, still include that in the application, but tell the compelling story first. Second, and also very important, proof of concept. This is important in general when we're seeking grant funding, especially if we're like, we would like this money to solve this problem, and we propose this solution. You should always have information as to why that solution and how do you know it will work, kind of thing. Similar and even more critical here when we are talking about very technical work, and especially if we're experimenting in different use of digital or digitization equipment or different outputs. What is the proof of concept? So even if it is a test concept, or perhaps you know that a different museum has done something similar last year and you can point to their product as an example, anything that helps to connect the dots for the grant reviewer that yes, this very technical project is possible. I know because either this your museum has tested it, or you have this example with this peer museum, and therefore I don't need to worry about whether or not it's possible. Like we just already know. So it helps them get over that hurdle of like, I'm not even sure they can do it, even if we give them the funding. Next point, clearly defined activities. Important for any grant application, especially if it's a multi-step or perhaps multi-activity grant. And even more so when we were talking about technical things, and if we're incorporating additional people, we need to think about what is our technical workflow. And then, of course, the overall workflow of the project. What are each of the activities or phases, and what are the steps? Being able to define those will be important, an important component for grant reviewers to even further understand, or at least feel confident that they understand the project you're proposing and how you propose to do it. Similarly, defined costs. Technical projects, collections management systems, digitization equipment, bringing on expertise or other personnel to increase capacity. Each of those things has the potential to be fairly expensive, especially in like nonprofit contexts. So knowing how much your proposed project will cost is very important, and equally so, showing the grant reviewers that you've done like the shopping, so to speak, and that you can show them numbers in terms of like, here's the proposal we received from the CMS for doing this enhanced data, for example, or here's the vendor proposal for bringing on contract staff for 6 months. Having very specific and even receiving ahead of time, like informal proposal type things from the vendors or partners, or if you're purchasing things, having those as the attachments and supporting documentation for your grant will be very important in terms of helping to justify the amount of money you're asking for. It also has the dual and important benefit of showing the grant reviewers that you have done your homework. And so the amount of money that you're asking for is accurate, because the grant agency, one of the concerns that they naturally have is if we give them $50,000, but actually their project only costs $30,000, like they don't want the $20,000 back. It's a bunch of paperwork and headaches for everyone. So just as they don't want you to go over the amount of funding and therefore have a potentially failed project, they don't want you to go under in the funding either. They want you to have the money that you need, and hopefully no more and no less. Also, what else have you done? So this gets into a bit of scene setting and showing credentials, past success, not just for you as perhaps the project director or person who will be doing majority of work or overseeing majority of work, but also for your museum. Like, is the museum, do they have a successful track record with, if not very technical grants, maybe just grants in general? Being able to point to some other success stories will be very helpful to your cause. They're not usually required, but they can be persuasive. And then finally, reference to best practices. So as museum professionals, we usually always sprinkle in best practices with any of the type of project work or discussion of project work that we do. This is even more so important for technical projects when we're talking about data creation and capture, when we're talking about data enhancement, doing products based off of our data and digital assets. All of those we should be referencing which best practices and verifying with those granting agencies, like, yes, again, we know what we're talking about. We plan to do things appropriately and, according to best practice of A, B, and C. And just a final layer of like, yes, this is a professional operation. We know what we're doing. We will be successful if we get this grant because we have all of these foundation blocks in place. Okay, information to include. So thinking about some of the specifics for the granting agency and having the CMS data lens with us, these are some of the final things for us to think about in our grant application. First of all is the give a damn reason. For any grant application you write, but especially for highly technical type projects or applications for funding, we need to use that compelling story, that compelling narrative to also introduce to the grant reviewers why it matters and why this particular project is perhaps more important or more compelling, more something than perhaps some of the other applications. And so needing them, the grant reviewers, to have a real stake and investment in, emotional investment in funding your application. So when we're thinking about give a damn reasons, and if we're thinking about technical projects, for example, who are we able to serve if we're able to enhance data in this way, or perhaps help make this third grade curriculum for a local history class? And being able to do that in a way that serves the community perhaps currently underserved. Perhaps there are some different and multivocal stories we could be sharing with our collection to help further fill out the full picture of local history. So it's more than just, in this example, creating local curriculum for our third graders. It's also helping to tell stories perhaps not told before, and certainly not in such an impactful way. So why people should give a damn is not just because we're providing curriculum, it's because we're providing something that is going to improve our understanding, it's going to improve the way we speak with each other, it's improving learning for our young people, and that's why you should give a damn. Next, the problem to be solved. So yes, compelling narrative, always have that on top, captures the imagination. They're now emotionally invested. They have bought in, they give a damn. And so now we need to frame it as this is the problem to be solved. So even though we think we may have said that in our compelling narrative, we also need to be very specific in this problem. So currently, this part of the collection isn't online yet. We've not been able to catalog it, or not to the extent where it can be made publicly available. And so that is part of the problem. But if we use our third grade curriculum example, another problem, and perhaps the more compelling one, is that there's not enough primary material available for this type of curriculum to be supported by your museum. So that is perhaps a more compelling part of the problem. So make sure you have those together. It's not, again, just in quotes that you've not been able to fully catalog or publish that part of the collection. Like, yes, that is our problem. We are aware of it, but there's more to it. And so you need to capture the whole piece of that. And then equally to address how you propose to solve it. So again, with that vision you've already painted for the grant reviewer, how are we solving it? Well, we're going to add capacity. We're going to send items out to be digitized, like whatever it is you're asking for the money for, it's going to result in solution being all these things are now fully cataloged, they're published online, we've helped make curriculum for third graders, like, and that is how we are solving the problem. Next step, clear solution. So problem and problem to be solved, clear solution piece of it. And this is where you would also put like the deliverables and the outcome. Two different things, but they are related. Deliverables are very specific. So deliverables are, we digitized 200 artifacts, and then we fully cataloged and published 200 records representative of those artifacts, as well as created third grade curriculum for the such and such county of curriculum. And those are very like, we did X, we got this Y, and tends to be more quantitative, tends to be more numbers based. The outcomes are after that, and they are the bigger and perhaps more qualitative things that you have achieved. So you've helped to solve a gap in your collections not being digitized, not being publicly available, but you've also helped to address that lack of primary material in the third grade curriculum. So bringing that solution back and speaking to it with specifics in your deliverables, but also like the bigger solution outcomes in your outcomes section. This will help with one of the final pieces, scoring criteria. So each of the areas we've talked through are things that you should include if you want your grant application to be successful. They are also usually things you should include that are called out in the scoring criteria, but it is still important to read through how a granting agency may be scoring their applications, because there can always be areas you may not expect that the granting agency, for whatever reason, is finding very important for that particular round of grant giving. So paying attention to what areas of the applications are receiving the most potential points, and to making sure that you're addressing each of the different factors or criteria that they have for their scoring criteria. So that's like the second piece to making sure your grant application is successful, is not only making it compelling, having problem to be solved, clear solution, great deliverables and outcomes, but also making sure you're providing all the information that they asked for, or at least indicated that they were looking at in their scoring criteria. And then finally, why you? So you, for us, it can seem obvious, like these collections, like, of course it should be us, or me as a person, I have expertise in this area, so of course it should be me. Things like that, even like the museum, like our museum is foremost and like one of the top three of this thing, so of course it should be our museum. You cannot take any of that for granted going into grant applications, especially with the different funding missions that granting agencies have, the different scoring criteria that they're looking at. It may not be you actually that they're looking to fund. So you need to help make that case. You just can't take that for granted, even if you are in a prestigious institution, even if you have a prestigious collection, or even if you are a pretty big deal. You still need to make that case, and it does need to be clear and compelling and included in your grant application. All right, how to determine the best funding match. So once you've chosen your product and you've worked through some of the, like, what's the compelling narrative? Why should they give a damn? What's the problem? What's the solution? Once you've started to ideate on that, you're in a place where you can start shopping for grant opportunities or different grant funders that have application calls that may be a good fit for you. And you want to make sure it's a good match, of course, before you put a ton of effort into any specific application. Because much like CMS, every collections management system is a bit different. The same is true for granting agencies. Every single one of them is different. And even if they have multiple applications, each of those applications is going to be different depending on what that bucket of funding is set aside for. So with that in mind, needing to be really clear when we're looking at granting agencies, do our missions match? Or at least does the project we propose, does that help support the granting agency's mission? So making sure first and foremost that that is in alignment. Next, and second most important, is the outcomes that you have proposed. Are those the same kind of outcomes that the granting agency is looking for? For each of the granting agencies, for each of the categories that they may fund, if they have multiple different calls or buckets of funding every year, they will want a specific set of types of outcomes. And so for your project and your proposed outcomes, those will need to match. Otherwise, the granting agency is not going to be interested in funding you to do a project that has outcomes that ultimately is not a good match for them. Funding amount is also important. Almost every granting opportunity will have some sort of indication, if not a very clear indication, of what the minimum and maximum award amount will be. And they will never go above or below that, especially if they're municipal funded. Those things are pretty locked in. And so if you have a grant project that is either too little or too much, with that grant in mind, they're going to wonder why you are applying. And so unless you have a more strategic and very well thought out and communicated multi-grant plan, which is expert level, then you need to only focus then on applications that are appropriately meeting your funding needs. Next, funding duration. Almost as important as the amount, we need to make sure that we have enough time to do the project we've proposed. Mini granting opportunities tend to default to like a 1-year cycle. The larger the grants, the longer that cycle can elongate. For example, there are some federal level grants where you could do 2 to even 3 years of a project, but those are huge projects with a huge amount of funding. So knowing how long the project is that you've proposed, how long that work will take, and making sure that it is in alignment with the grant you're going after, because it's not much like the funding, the duration is pretty locked in. So unless there's like very extenuating circumstances, like natural disaster level circumstances, it's usually very frowned upon to get any sort of extension for a grant project. And then finally, award history. This is a great indication, especially if you're a little fuzzy on the mission of the granting agency, or if you're not quite sure if your outcomes are a good match for that outcomes, because sometimes granting agencies can be really vague in their language. Looking at their award history is a great insight into what have they funded in the past. What are some like specific either peer museums they funded that help to indicate it's a good match, or perhaps there's very like a similar outcome but done in a different state or province from you. Being able to see those examples can help clarify in your mind if it's a good match. And if it is, you can even sort of like name drop or reference these similar projects. This can be helpful to indicate to the grant reviewer, like, yes, I think this is a good fit because this is very similar to what they did over here. And it indicates to the grant reviewers that like you've done your homework, and so they can feel even more confident in terms of this being a good match. So always good to do your homework and make sure that you are within parameters, but as well as referencing, I know that you grant reviewers, grant agency care about X. This is how this project supports X. All right. So that was a good amount of information for you. There's even more available. The Survivor's Guide to Museum Grant Writing. We have a free e-copy available courtesy of Lucidea Press. This goes into all the grant, like foundational pieces and fundamentals. So if you're new to the grant writing aspect and want to have like a nice and easy intro into it, this book is a great place to start to just get some of those fundamentals in place. There are additional webinar recordings, especially for like grant applications in general. Today, again, we were focused on through our CMS and data lens when we were talking about grant funding. But there's, of course, many more webinars on grant funding as well as data creation and data enhancement. Please check out my resource page with Lucidea, and you can check out those webinar recordings, and then, of course, any blog posts or additional ebook resources that could be helpful for you. And then, very relevant to today's topic is the grants directory. Lucidea and I partnered on this and launched it a couple years ago, and it has since become popular, and we try our best to keep it up to date. These offer at the national or federal level both foundation as well as municipal funding. It also includes United States and Canada opportunities. So whether you are in the United States or up north in Canada, we have grant opportunities in both locations that you can use the filter for. And it will also, further down in the granting directory, are a couple more faceted searching that you can do based on the award amount. You can do based on like type of project. So if you're looking specifically for a CMS or digital type project, you can easily filter those and get to some of the opportunities that could be a good fit for you. All right, and then workbook and templates. So once you're to the point where you've got a project in mind, you've even picked out a couple different grant opportunities you think might be a good fit, then is the time to get the grant workbook and template. It will help walk you through the very typical sections included in a grant application, and it also has a specific templated example where it will walk you through a collections management system project. So you've got an example you can work with there, as well as 3 other examples that you can use and take and run with in your grant application journey. And then additional reading. If your brain appreciates bringing information in by reading via text, we have a lot of different grant application or funding focused blog posts. These I think are perhaps the most appropriate for our conversation today. But please feel free to check out Lucidea's Think Clearly blog. You can either look at my name or just look up grants in general, but these in particular I thought would be helpful. For example, constructing a fundable museum project, more specifically about halfway down, how to win museum grant funding for quote boring projects. Boring in quotes, of course, because it's not boring for us, but they can be more technical, a little bit more dry. So perfect for our conversation today. All right, so we covered how to identify projects for funding and some of the things to think about when we're thinking about a potential collections management system type project. We reviewed what funders look for in applications, so being aware that those are things that they specifically want or need to see and how to best address those. We took a look at the information to include, so things that may not have necessarily been called out by the grant application, but due to the nature of our project are incredibly important for us to include and to do so clearly. And then how to determine the best funding match. So especially when we're thinking of technical projects, we want to make sure that missions met, but also the outcomes match, and other factors that could help make your application more bulletproof. We then took a look at several resources that are free and available for you. Please feel free to go and use as you see fit, as well as some additional reading. And we are closing out with today's topic. So just a quick plug, speaking of data and collections management systems, the latest book we have out at Lucidea Press is Demystifying Data Preparation for a New CMS. And I have to say, whether you're going into a new CMS or you're just super interested in like data prep and perhaps cleanup, this is a great book to start thinking through how to review and analyze your data, as well as cleanup strategies that all together work towards preparation for if you're doing a CMS migration, or if it may be in your near future. So go get your copy free via this courtesy of Lucidea Press. And definitely something to check out if you're at all interested in your data work. All right, and with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Bradley.
Thank you, Rachel, for the wonderful presentation. And if you'd like to learn more about our museum collections management system called Argus, please feel free to visit our website or reach out to us at sales@lucidea.com, and we'd be happy to have a chat with you. If you have any questions about any of our software or our company, our contact details are listed on the screen, and please stay tuned for more webinars and content related to the series. On behalf of the Lucidea team, I thank you all for attending, and until next time, thank you.